Okay.
Hello. I'm Christine Richards, Chairman of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. I want to welcome everyone to our committee meetings. And before we begin today, I need to make a couple of housekeeping announcements. First, I want to welcome newly appointed Commissioner Thomas Lehrman to his first meeting with us. We look forward to getting to know you and are excited to have you aboard. Unfortunately, I also have to announce the departure of our Vice Chair, Chris Tudor, but we all wish him well in his new position with the Attorney General's office. I am appointing Commissioner Lauren Smith to serve as the chair of the Rules, Policy, and Governance Committee, and we will discuss election of a new vice chair at a subsequent commission meeting. Finally, Commissioner Carter recently underwent a medical procedure and is recovering at home. His absence today is excused, and I have asked Commissioner Griscom to serve as our temporary chair of the Business Operations Committee for our meetings this week. Michael, if you're watching, we're keeping you in our thoughts and prayers and wishing you a speedy recovery. And with that, I will hand it over to Tom to begin our committee meetings.
Thank you, Chris. Welcome to the March 27, 2025 meeting of the Business Operations Committee. Whoops. Okay. Thank you, Chris. Welcome to the March 27, 2020. You can see I'm sort of out of practice. Meeting of the Business Operations Committee of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. Hayden, may I ask you to take a roll call of the commissioners?
Commissioner Carter, Commissioner Lehrman,
Present.
Chair Griscom.
That one.
Present.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Are there any questions or comments from commissioners before we begin? Seeing none, as Chair Richards noted, Commissioner Carter's absence is excused today, and Commissioner Eddie Smith also notified us of his absence today, and he's excused as well. The Business Operations Committee will hear several updates from staff on the agenda today. First, we will hear the Executive Director's operational update. Then the Commission's Director of Finance and Operations, Melanie Harrell, will present budget updates for FY25 and 26. Do we have any questions or comments on the agenda before we vote to approve? Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the agenda is approved. That was the quickest vote we've ever done, let me tell you. All right. The minutes of the meeting held on January 23, 2025 have been provided. Does anyone have any comments or edits to make regarding the prior minutes before we proceed? Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it, and the meeting minutes are approved. The first item on our agenda is an operations update from our Executive Director, Tess Stovall. Tess, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. I'm happy to provide this operational update to the committee. First, from a staffing perspective, we are in the hiring process for 3 positions. So we actually have just this week have someone who's accepted the role of the Director of School Programs and Support. So we're really thrilled to have someone coming on board in the next couple weeks. We are also at the end of the hiring process for the Student Data Analyst role. And then finally, we, as I shared earlier, Joy Jean Cummings left us. She was at the lunchroom just briefly to take a role at Brown University. So we are looking for a new person to step into that role. And of course, always excited for people to leave the nest. But we also know that we counted on Joy Jean a lot. And kudos to Sophie for temporarily bringing this meeting together, but we are in the process of finding a new Joy Jean. The second thing I wanted just to note for visibility is around office space. And so as we are thinking about the addition of staff, additional responsibilities from the General Assembly, I wanted the commission to be aware that the office space that we have on the 8th floor right now is the totality of the office space that the commission will have. And so while there is additional space for us to build out seating, there will come a point in which we will have to move to flexible seating and or a fully hybrid model where we are actually moving people throughout the week in terms of seating. That is where most state agencies have already gone into a flexible seating model to maximize the real estate for the state. We've been lucky so far in that we haven't had to get there, but I just wanted to put that on your radar that as we are thinking about building out additional seating for the next fiscal year, Melanie and I have already started to think that we're going to start just moving directly to flexible seating because we're going to need it pretty soon in the future. I also wanted to put on your radar that Melanie Harrell and I have started to talk about a grant management system that we will probably need to start thinking about and acquiring and implementing in the next couple of years as the number of schools increase. And so when I say grant management system, I mean how we work directly with our schools and operators on sharing their grant budgets, them submitting budgets to us, them submitting reimbursement and documentation to us, and just managing the life cycle of a grant. Right now, we are fully based in an Excel spreadsheet model and are utilizing that primarily for budgets and reimbursements, but we have done some conversations with other statewide authorizers who are larger than us than to ask what sort of systems do they use, how can we really think about operationalizing a grant management system. So we're very much in the early stages of that, but I wanted to put that on the commissioner's radar that we recognize as an area of kind of systems and growth as we scale, that we really need to get our hands around how do we do this in a kind of more efficient pattern. So more to come from us in future committee meetings. The third thing I wanted to bring forward is procurement update. So the main procurement item we have for this committee as approval is our annual interagency agreement with the Tennessee Language Center. The Tennessee Language Center is the state agency that we use for interpretation and translation services. This is an agreement we've had in place for several years. And so since it is over $25,000, we are bringing this for the committee's approval. And lastly, wanted to flag, we do have upcoming 2025 meetings calendared, as well as at the July meeting, we do anticipate bringing 2026 meetings for approval. I did want to note that we will not be polling for availability for 2026 until the General Assembly adjourns and we get a sense of all legislation that has been passed and any additional meetings that may be required in 2026. But do note for this committee, we do intend to bring the 2026 meetings for approval at our July meeting. And with that, I'll turn it over to the chair for any questions.
Do any commissioners have comments or questions for Tess? Let me ask you one thing, if I may, on grants. With a lot of the actions that are going on right now at the federal level, it may be too early, but any indication of grants and the impact that we might see with any of our schools?
Thank you, and I'll defer to Melanie for additional thoughts. At this time, we don't see an impact. We don't anticipate an impact. Most of our grants come from the entitlement grants, so the Titles 1, 2, 3, 4, IDEA, et cetera. And so at this point, it's a question of when do we receive our district allocations and potentially from whom, rather than if we would. But Melanie, I'll defer to any other additional.
Thank you, Tess, and thank you, Chair Griscom. I would say right now the question is really more around timing than it is around kind of accessibility of those grants. So I think typically in a normal year, we would have a little bit firm of a grasp on when we could expect our district allocations. I think a lot of that is tentative, but I am expecting an update from the Tennessee Department of Education next week. So we're hoping we'll get a better sense of timeline at that point.
Thank you. Any other questions? So I will entertain a motion to approve the interagency agreement with the Tennessee Language Center.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Is there any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Ayes have it. Thank you, Tess, for your update. The final item today on our agenda is updates on the FY '25 and '26 budgets from Director of Finance Operations, Melanie Harrell. Melanie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Griscom. So first, I've provided our FY25 budget to actuals update. This is through March 1st. This reflects the latest state and local true-up of TISA and local funds. So we have seen some adjustments for changes in our average daily membership and changes to the per pupil amount. Just as a reminder for the committee, that is driven both by our enrollment, the geographic LEA's enrollment, and then local tax revenue collections in addition to state funds. So we have seen a slight decrease to the per pupil amount in both Davidson and Shelby counties, but these were not significantly material to our revenue assumptions at this point. We are still continuing to monitor revenue collections in Davidson County. There's been a lot of conversation about that over the past 18 months. So currently, based on what Davidson County reported for their final revenue last year, we do know that their tax collections were down at the local level, but currently the per pupil rate that our schools are being paid on still exceeds last year's. So I think we are continuing to monitor that to the extent that we can, also make sure our schools are aware of the fact that there could continue to be true-ups in true-ups of that rate down to a lower per pupil rate. So we are still projecting to be under budget overall, and that we will have a significant reversion, which is always our goal each year. Second, I've provided a draft version of an updated FY26 budget. So this is not for a vote. I just want to give the committee an update on the direction that we are heading. We will still be bringing an amended budget for your review and approval in July. This updates to current TISA assumptions as well as our current enrollment assumptions given the 24 schools that we will have in our portfolio next year. So we are anticipating about 8,300 students enrolled in K-12. That does not include our pre-K enrollment because those students do not generate state and local funds at this time. So this is just our funded enrollment at about 8,300. This draft budget does project that the authorizer fee should cover our agency expenses or get very, very close. I know that's always been a goal for our staff and for this body. So we're excited to see that next year. That we anticipate at this moment, we will very likely be meeting that expectation. We did have in our FY26 funding request, a request for 2 additional positions to support our district functions, one for our school programs and supports teams and one for our finance and operations teams. We were very excited that that was included in the governor's proposed budget. So obviously that is still moving through the legislature, but we are hopeful that those positions will be included for next year. So I have included those positions in the budget assumptions here. I've also included some assumptions around a 4% paper performance rate. That's in alignment with historical trends recently. But obviously those are still 2 items that will be moving through the legislature as we near the end of session. So we'll be providing more updates on that as well as any other items that may be relevant after legislative session at our July meeting. So that's this time. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Melanie. Do any commissioners have questions on the budget for Melanie? Seeing none, thank you for the update. Thank you all for your attendance and participation at this meeting of the Business Operations Committee of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. Are there any final comments before we adjourn? Seeing none, the next meeting of the Business Operations Committee will be set July 24, 2025. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Aye, have it, and we are adjourned. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Terrence Patterson, and I want to welcome you to the March 27th, 2025 meeting of the School Performance and Accountability Committee of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. Hayden, could you please take a roll call of the commissioners?
Commissioner Griscom,
Here.
Chair Richards,
Here.
Chair Patterson.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Okay, thanks, Hayden. The School Performance and Accountability Committee will hear several presentations from staff. And first, Director of Authorizing Beth Figueroa will present the Authorizer Evaluation Report. Deputy Director of Authorizing Maggie Lund and Data and Accountability Coordinator Rebecca Lederber will give a presentation on the renewal criteria. And then following that, Maggie and Rebecca will present updates on the school performance framework. And finally, Beth will present updates on the 24-25 school year. Do commissioners have any questions or comments on the agenda before we vote to approve?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. The ayes have it, and the agenda is approved. The minutes from the committee meeting, excuse me, held on January 23rd, 2025 have been provided. Does anyone have any edits or comments to make regarding the prior minutes before we proceed? Is there
I
a
move
motion?
their approval.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. The ayes have it, and the minutes are approved. Our first item is a presentation on the latest authorizer evaluation report from Director of Authorizing Beth Figueroa. Beth, you are recognized.
Thank you so much, Chair Patterson. As mentioned, today I'm here to present the results of the most recent authorizer evaluation report for the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. This is a real critical component of ensuring the quality in charter school authorizing across the state. And so to begin today's discussion, just wanted to provide some context. And so in 2019, the General Assembly amended TCA, charging the State Board of Education with the responsibility of ensuring the effective operation of authorizers throughout the state. And this is done through the authorizer evaluation process. And so as a result, they're responsible for overseeing this process, and that includes reviewing the Charter Commission and our authorizing practices. The oversight involves a formal evaluation process where the state board examines various artifacts of evidence to ensure the authorizers are adhering to Tennessee's quality authorizing standards. And so the standards, as detailed within state board policy, really emphasize and set the benchmark for our daily practices and how we go about our authorizing business. And so it's important to note that the formal evaluation process is done biannually. So every 2 years we have a formal evaluation, and then on our off years we complete a self-assessment process. And so now just diving into the specific components of the authorizer evaluation process in more detail. The evaluation is conducted by a team of members, both state board staff as well as external evaluators. And the process, it's quite thorough, it's quite rigorous. And during that process, they go through hundreds of documents that we submit demonstrating our authorizing practices that we do over a 2-year period. All evaluation reports are approved by the state board, and they're made available to the public on their website. The evaluation process itself is it's based on a rubric set up of 21 standards that define our essential practices. So this covers everything from our commitment and capacity. So they look at our human capital, how we train our staff. It looks at our authorizer fee reports, as well as how we go about overseeing and evaluating our schools through amendment processes, renewals, revocations. It looks at every aspect of our authorizing work. And then based on the evidence submitted, that is where they come to a final score. And there are consequences. So if, for example, an authorizer is not meeting standards or falls to a certain rate, there would be corrective action, potential remittance of the authorizer fee. So it's a very thorough process, but it's really important for ensuring quality authorizing. And so now as we look at the commission's overall rating, as you can see from the table, the commission received an exemplary rating of 3.76, which we believe is really a testament to the hard work, the dedication that we have. We're always, anytime anything comes to our desk, we're always like, how do we ensure that we are adhering to high quality authorizing standards? And so, of course, we are proud of this rating, and the state board has publicly recognized our best practices as a result of this. And so as a result of this, we've earned an exemption from the 2026 formal evaluation, which is great. Just it's a lot of work, and so we are thankful for the rating. We'll still do a self-assessment on the off years. However, we don't have to go through the formal evaluation process. And so going to the next slide. Thank you. So this slide here highlights some of the specific best practices that the state board publicly recognized the commission for adhering to. And so first and foremost, the commission sets a clear mission for authorizing and ensures that our policies, our processes, and our practices align with the mission. And as we think about our strategic plan, our core values, they could really see how all of those items worked together cohesively across all of our work. Next, the commission, we updated our framework, as you know, to incorporate a mission-specific goal. And that really highlights our commitment to honoring how our schools are nuanced and how they have unique objectives and focuses, and that's something that our framework does. Additionally, the commission clearly defines and establishes a robust and comprehensive reporting process. So as we gather documents from schools, it's very clear how everything comes together to inform how we evaluate our schools on an ongoing basis. Next, we consistently use ongoing oversight, intervention, and our evaluation process to determine when an intervention is needed. And then finally, when we think about our recommendations for amendments, New Start appeals, all of those items, they highlighted that there really is a thorough analysis and a rigorous process that we do when we are evaluating and making decisions. And the next slide. Thank you. And then in addition to those best practices, all authorizer evaluation reports highlight both strengths as well as areas of focus for authorizers. And so when it comes to identified strengths, they cited that the commission demonstrates a strong commitment to quality authorizing standards. We are always looking to continually improve and that we make impactful improvement planning. So that was something that was highlighted. Secondly, the commission utilizes experienced review teams. When we think about our New Start process, they were able to identify that we had a thoughtful process, thoughtful rubrics when it came time for the capacity interview and the public hearings, that the questions that we were asking were informing those recommendations, and which ultimately result in approving high-quality schools. And then lastly, the performance framework was highlighted and is incorporated into the charter agreement, aligning with those standards. And then, again, while we achieved a rating of exemplary, we know there's always areas that we can look to improve. And so some of the items that they did note was that over the last few years, the commission has made a lot of positive updates. We're always working with our schools to collect feedback. How can we make things easier? How can we streamline processes? However, they still believe that more work can be done to avoid any sort of frequency, duplication, all of those items when it comes to oversight activities. So that's something we will be committed to. Next, they, through our amendment process, they had made some notes about ensuring that we're granting amendments to schools that specifically demonstrate thorough preparation and strong academic results. And then lastly, through the evaluation process, they identified the need for clear renewal criteria as well as having an established closure protocol. And so in closing, as we look towards the next year and kind of our work that we are going to do as a result of this evaluation process is that we're going to continue to work together with across teams to ensure that we are streamlining our processes. We also want to make sure that we have those protocols in place, like the closure protocol, as well as the renewal criteria, which I'm pleased to share that the closure protocol is now done. It's on the website. And I believe next on the agenda is we're going to be talking about the renewal criteria. So we've already are working to coming into compliance with those items. And then just lastly, we are, even though we have those kind of off years in the evaluation process, it's not a moment for us just to relax. It's we need to make sure that we are continually looking towards quality authorizing standards and all the valuable lessons that have learned and taking it seriously even in those off years. And so that's all I had, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Beth. Any questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner
Yes. I want to thank the entire team for this wonderful outcome. We don't get to exemplary without the work of every member of this team. While the three of you do lead the charge, every single member provides insight in the way we do things, and it is the collective effort that allows us to have this wonderful result. But You're talking to someone who, when she came home from school, her daddy wanted to know why she got a 98 instead of 100. So there are obviously some things that we can improve on here. And while I am overjoyed that we don't have a formal review next year, and secondly, I do note that some of the legislation that is being considered may impact particularly our ability to address these issues of redundancy, procedures that maybe aren't needed, those kinds of things. We need to really go after that. Our former chair has had us on a jihad about that for now several years, and we're still at 3.48, so we've got to do better. That being said, Mr. Chairman, I would like to recommend that we have a update from this team at either the January or March meeting next year on how they're addressing the specifics of anything that needs improvement. And that'll better prepare us for our next substantive evaluation, in my opinion, but please feel free to weigh in.
No, thank you for that comment, and you echoed my sentiment. I may have not gotten questioned on my 98s, but certainly on my 92s and 93s. So I'm in agreement with you there, and I certainly would ask Executive Director Stovall if the team could provide an update for us per Chair Richards' request. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. One of the other things I want to highlight is schools that have come before us and school systems that have come before us, where I think you all have done, I've shared this with Tess, an excellent job in helping Rutherford County, Jackson, Madison, Montgomery County better understand charter schools, how they operate, how they fit into a school system. And I would hope, and proud of what you've got here, but I would hope we continue looking at opportunities. I've got one particularly in my mind, as you can imagine, for school systems to really, who have charter schools, and we know they may be struggling, even though they don't want to say it, that we find an opportunity to offer assistance, not to tell them we're smarter than they are, but to be able to go in and help them understand how you manage a charter schools, the type of of processes that maybe are different than just a typical public school. So I have had this conversation with Tess for the past couple of weeks, but I do think that there's a lot of good lessons that you all as a team, because it's what we do, it's what you do, to help these school systems better understand how charter schools fit into an overall public school system. So thank you.
Thank you for those comments. And before we move to the next item, I do just want to say, when I think back to our early days of formation, we wanted to be an exemplar in terms of authorizing. And I think this is a reflection of that hard work and commitment to that original vision. And even as I think about our most recent mission and vision conversation, we're not just words on a page. We are, in fact, living into it. So I just want to acknowledge that work of the team as well. I know Chair Richards did the same. Thank you, Beth, for that update. The next item on the agenda is a presentation on the renewal criteria, and so we'll hear from Maggie and Rebecca. You are both recognized.
Thank you, Chair Patterson. I'm Maggie Lund. I'm Deputy Director of Authorizing. I'm excited to dive into the renewal criteria with you all today. As a direct result of the conversation that we're having around authorizer evaluation, one of the things that came up was the development of longstanding renewal criteria. So I'm excited to dive in today with you all. So quality authorizing standards and statute outline requirements for authorizers regarding charter school renewals. And so the state board policy is up there on your screen, where there are specific requirements to develop renewal criteria for all schools within an authoriser's portfolio. And as we just talked about, this was also identified as a need. I do want to say we've had renewal criteria before as a commission. You all will remember we adopted that annually as we were going through renewals for ASD transition schools. So schools that came to us from the Achievement School District that fulfilled the remainder of their charter term with us. when they would come up for renewal, given the uniqueness of that scenario, we had very specific and highly contextualized renewal criteria for those schools. So I do want to note that while we have had renewal criteria before, the push is really to develop very broad, long-standing renewal criteria for all schools within our portfolio as they come up for renewal at that 10-year term. So the renewal process has many, many components. So we'll start kind of big picture and talk about what is involved in a renewal. As you'll see here, there are components that include a full review of cumulative performance of the school. The school has to submit a renewal application. We conduct a capacity interview with the school and/or operator. We hold a renewal site visit where we go to the school for a full day and observe classes and talk to stakeholders. We also hold a public hearing. And then I just want to note that the renewal criteria is a small component of the entire process, right? So when we think about criteria and we talk about it in our discussion today, I just want to kind of ground us in this is one piece of a very large process that we undergo to go through such a high stakes decision. So what we are doing today is on first read, you will have renewal criteria. Charter agreements are currently for 10 years, and we know that a school undergoes the renewal process starting in year 9. We're adopting these criteria, as I mentioned, to be longstanding for schools within our portfolio. The idea with this is that at any point in time in the tenure of a school's agreement, they can kind of see whether or not they are trending on or off track for renewal. That is kind of our intention behind this, is something that's simple, that is transparent, and that at any point in their agreement, an operator could easily calculate as to whether and how they're performing. We went through a extensive process, I would say, in creating a renewal criteria, given that so many operators in our portfolio have been with us for a while and know that this will affect them in their upcoming renewal decision. So as part of our process, we surveyed our operators. I am excited by the responses we got from operators. You can tell on the whole by the quality of response and the time spent on the survey, they really thought about this and provided some really good feedback for us. We also talked to other state authorizers and saw what other authorizers across the nation are doing in terms of renewal criteria. From there, we developed draft criteria, sent it to operators for feedback, and then what's in front of you today is the criteria for first read. Before we dive into the criteria themselves, I want to talk a little bit about the purpose that these criteria serve, what they are, and what they are not. So first, because the criteria are used for all schools within our portfolio, it's really important that we are thinking about them being a gut check as to how they're performing throughout the charter term. So we want this to be helpful for operators. We want this to be a tool for operators to be able to use. But I also want to note that these are guidelines for performance over time. These are not like definitive check boxes necessarily, but more of a high level check of on or off track in terms of how a school is performing. Also, these criteria are directly aligned to the school performance framework, which our schools are very familiar with. And it is kind of a roll-up of their ratings in alignment with the school performance framework over time in the tenure of their agreement. With that, I'll talk about some of the things that renewal criteria are not. A renewal decision for a school is not based solely on the renewal criteria. If you'll recall, the first slide that I went through, there are many, many components in a renewal decision. So, and we mentioned this in the criteria document itself that you all have within your record, which I'll have you all pull up in just a second. This is not a decision. This is meant to be a tool to determine whether or not a school is on or off track. So with that, a school could be deemed on track for renewal and not get renewed, or vice versa. I also want to note that the renewal criteria are not terribly detailed and contextualized. We really go through a school's individualized performance with a fine-tooth comb as part of the renewal process. And so we've really tried to make this criteria very broad and applicable across our portfolio. And the last piece that I'll say that renewal criteria are not, and they're not comprehensive of performance. They're looking at the record in totality as it's rolled up through the school performance framework. But we know that there are other components of a school's performance that may fall outside of the framework or other contexts that we do take into account into a renewal decision that may not be a part of this criteria. So with that, these are the renewal criteria. You also have a document in your record that has these in a little more detail. So I'll just kind of run through them briefly. As you'll see, we have the three components of our school performance framework: academic, organizational performance, and financial performance. Within each of those sections, we have 2 bullet points that outline the criteria for renewal. The first, which is across all 3 sections, is that a school must meet standard for the majority of the years in their charter term. It's, as I said, very broad. When we look at academic performance, the second bullet point there talks about meeting standard for at least 2 of the 3 most recent years. Interestingly, this is something that came out of operator feedback, is really wanting to put some emphasis on the last years of the charter agreement leading up to renewal, given that so many of our schools struggle in those initial years of getting off the ground, making sure that they're kind of getting in their groove. And so this really honors what performance is towards the end of their term. Also, it's really indicative of trajectory, right? So if you have a school who's doing really well, you would anticipate in those last few years before renewal that trajectory would continue, and vice versa would be, a similar situation. Organizational performance and financial performance for the second bullet point, you'll notice that we have kind of 2 statements here. First is that meeting standard for at least 2 of the 3 most recent years, which we mimics the academic section. But we also have must not have consecutive years of not meeting standard. One of the things, and this is something that not only came out of operator feedback, but we've seen nationally too. We've done, as authorizers, a lot of conversations around indicators of distress for charter schools. And an indicator of distress is often multiple years of not meeting standard organizationally or financially can oftentimes be an indicator of distress. So that is why that piece is included within the criteria as well. I have some examples here that I think might be helpful for us to look at in terms of how this kind of rolls up and we would use in decisions. So the first thing that I'll say here is School A is on track for renewal. You'll notice that the school at times within their tenure has not necessarily met standard, but overall they have rolled up to be on track for renewal. One note about this, though, is that in the academic section, you've noticed that there are 2 does not meets. This was meant to trick you. I was going to do a pop quiz because the academic section, you can have consecutive does not meets, and then that would make them not off track for academic performance at the interim. I should note that, too, the bolded section in the front end is what we would look at for their interim review. So as part of their interim, which is the 5 years, we're looking at the last 4 years of performance and giving them an on-track or off-track rating. School B is also on track. You'll see more green. This is an easier pop quiz. And then School C, here would be a school that would not be on track for renewal based on the criteria. There are a few reasons here. The main issue falls within the last 2 to 3 years. You'll see that the school has not met standard in terms of the last 3 years. They have 2 of the 3 years as does not meets in academics and in organizational performance. Last thing I'll say, some considerations. I want to note that if we have a situation in which, because we're working with even numbers here, if a majority cannot be determined, we've thought through that. We'll take it on a case-by-case basis with the school looking at additional data. So we'll look at state accountability data. We will heavily consider any interventions that the school may be under, particularly in alignment with our policy, and do any additional data analysis that we need to do. As a reminder, the renewal criteria is a portion of the whole process, but if there is an issue with majority, we can pull additional data to make that determination. And then the last thing I'll say is if we have a school that has received notice of Tier 2 or higher intervention in alignment with our policy, we weigh that very heavily in a renewal decision, and so that would be something where a school may be trending on track for certain sections of the framework, but depending on that intervention, they may bubble up to off track. And with that, I will take any questions about the renewal criteria.
Any questions? Thank you, Maggie. Go ahead, Chair.
Without trying to predict what's going to happen on the hill to my left.
Sure.
I'm assuming as you look at this, if there's a change that we've asked for, that you all will come back as a team and sit down and make those adjustments, that if you've got somebody that's in a shorter period than 5, how that fits. I mean, I listened, Maggie, as you talked about, when we look at the first 4 years of 5, so I'm assuming there's probably a beginning there of what you might do if we've got a less than a 10-year term to begin evaluating whether it then extends. And then I probably haven't thought about this, so if we do let's say we got somebody less than 10, how that first hurdle will apply to the overall 10 years. So I'm not trying to look for answers today, but knowing, as you all do, that there's hopefully legislation out there that's going to give us a little more flexibility, that it clearly will impact what you're presenting today.
Absolutely. I think that the beauty of this criteria is that it is pretty broad. And so I think it's somewhat easily adaptable depending on what the term may end up being for any specific school. We can definitely revisit that.
Go ahead, Chair.
I appreciate this work. It's terrific, and I really think it's a big improvement because it'll help us in our conversations, particularly as you meet with governing boards. They need to see these once they're finalized and approved, and there needs to be a fulsome conversation as to how their school is doing vis-a-vis these criteria. One of the things we try to avoid is surprises. And if people think that everything is just wonderful because they aren't hearing from us or they never get any indication that they're having some issues, a board for a not-for-profit is not necessarily going to understand the workings of the renewal process well enough to address issues that may need to be addressed unless we bring them to their attention. So I would like us to be sure that as we think about these, that we build into our process of meeting with governing boards the criteria once they're finalized, and also the particulars of how their school is doing vis-a-vis those criteria, being very careful as you are here to point out this is but one part, but a big part of the overall renewal decision. But it's great work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other comments? I know we have other commissioners present. I don't know if you guys have any comments as well.
Chair Patterson, can
Yeah,
we
go
run
ahead.
back to C for a second? I just want to get a gut check because we did go back and forth about particularly the academic performance around C and whether or not you all are comfortable with this. If it's half and half, the staff will dig a little deeper, or if it's trending upward. So I think we had a lot of internal conversations about this idea because we know this is a highly probable, given 8 years, we could be at an even number. Just a gut check of how this reacts to you guys.
Well, my reaction on this was that because 2 of the does not meet were in the last 3 years, that kind of answered that problem for this example. It would be harder if they did not meet in years 5 and 6 versus 7 and 8. But then again, I think this is that overall, let's look at the whole situation, particularly in the post-COVID world. We might feel differently about this than we would if everything had been going normally. Hopefully in the future, that's where we'll be. For most instances with a 10-year term, we're going to be looking at this with 9 years of data. So I am less worried about the majority than maybe I should be, but I'm not as worried about it.
Yeah, so my instinct is I do like the fact that we're weighting the most recent years more heavily than the previous years. I think if you were asking how I might think about a vote based on this data, I think I might be more heavily weighed toward a supermajority. So if it's like, 5 out of the 4 years you were meeting, I might have a tougher time. I'd love to see, more than just 50 plus 1. But certainly I would weigh the totality of all of the factors, but I think academic performance would certainly be the most important when I look at these three. So, but I do think this example is a tough one, but I would tend to agree with you guys.
For me, just a clarifying question, which is, and this is something that came up when you were being reappointed, Terrence, is this question of how we measure academic performance. Are those statewide versus, local? And to the extent that a school is performing well vis-a-vis its local peers, but is not performing as well statewide, part of this is just my ignorance, how the academic performance criterion is actually calculated. But I think that'd be an important consideration.
Yeah, I'm happy to touch on that broadly. And then in our next session, we'll talk about school performance framework in much more detail. But we have an academic section of our framework that's made up of 4 components. We align directly in the student outcome section to the state letter grade. We have a comparative performance section in which we compare the school's performance to the resident district. So it would be, in this instance, their local peers. We do that overall by academic proficiency in math, ELA, social studies, and science. And we also do it by subgroup. So we look at individual subgroups of students and compare it to those same individual subgroups of students in the resident district. So that's comparative performance. We have a mission-specific section in which the schools develop mission-specific goals and are held accountable to. And then the last section is TVOS, so that's our growth measure. And so that all of that rolls up into what you're seeing here in terms of academic performance of meeting or not meeting.
That's great.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks for that answer. And before I ask for a vote and a motion, I guess I want to look to our general counsel. Can you just clarify that we are approving this for first reading, and so it will then move to the full board, or will we look at it again as a committee before it gets to the board? Can you just clarify that for us?
Yeah, so this is on first reading. You're moving it to the commission to continue discussion, but it will come back to this committee on final reading as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just wanted to make that clarification that we have a new member, and then also for the listening public and for myself. Is there a motion to send the renewal criteria to the full commission for a vote?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, the ayes have it. And the renewed criteria is sent to the full commission for a vote on first reading. Okay, next we will hear an update on the school performance framework from Maggie and Rebecca. You're both recognized.
Thank you, Chair Patterson. I appreciate the question, Commissioner Lehrman, because it leads us perfectly into Commission Policy 3.700, which is our school performance framework. This framework sets accountability standards for all of our schools within the portfolio, academically, organizationally, and financially. I would recommend, given kind of the detail with which we're going to be running through this, you have your own handy-dandy school performance framework, Commission Policy 3.700, that is redlined with the changes within your materials. And so as I kind of run through this, I have some page numbers that I'll mention just to help. I know it's a lengthy 40-something page document. We developed this, the one that is in front of you, in 2022. Our schools are evaluated against this policy annually and against all metrics. All of the accountability measures that we hold our schools to back up to this kind of annual evaluation that we do against the policy. After 3 years of implementing this, we just have a few adjustments and tweaks to make on some of the indicators within, and so that's what we're running through today. So starting with the academic section of the framework, I'm going to run through some high-level proposed changes for you all, and then I have a couple indicators that I would love your weigh-in and discussion on. So starting with the academic section, this is on page 4. Student outcomes. So student outcomes section directly aligns with the state's accountability model, which is also known as the letter grade. We have adjusted the language within this section to align with the new guidance from the Tennessee Department of Education regarding state accountability systems. As you may recall, this changed last year. with the new letter grade calculation. So we have updated this language within just to make sure that it mimics this. We've also adjusted contingency plan language within this section. Should any state accountability systems be paused or unavailable in the future, we have a more clear contingency plan within. The second piece that we're adjusting for the academic section is the mission-specific goal, which is on page 8. We've adjusted language to allow for commission staff to have the ability to negotiate and approve schools' mission-specific goals. This is really just to allow us to work directly with the school on developing that goal. We've also built in language to allow schools to make changes to their goal, small tweaks that are non-material, at the interim review. And then finally, we've moved the majority of our guidance in developing mission-specific goals that used to live in our framework to a supplemental guidance document, just to reduce kind of the language within the policy itself. Those are the academic adjustments. If there are no questions about those, I will move to financial. Great. The financial section, we just made very small adjustments here. First, we have on page 17, unrestricted days cash. We included, that's for line item 1B, we included clarifying language to address sources of information for that indicator. And then for line item 2E, which is total margin by school, we included some language that allows schools to strategically plan to operate in a deficit in any given fiscal year. This really comes from some of our operators making large capital investments, which previously would have resulted in them not meeting standard for this indicator, but we know some of that is intentional, and so we just wanted to provide the opportunity for more context within this indicator. Yes.
Chair, can I interrupt for a second? On the school performance framework, we talk about school to resident district,
Yes.
but we don't have any flexibility built into this for exceedingly large districts and considering comparisons to clusters, which is a really big problem in some of our larger districts. I know it's a huge one in Shelby County. Depending upon which cluster you're in, you can be much lower performing and still be substantially better than other schools in that geographic cluster. And that has always been something that we've asked for information on. Is this something that we should be building into the way we think about this, or should we put a footnote noting the flexibility? Or I just feel a little uncomfortable because I know from Shelby County particularly, we have some clusters where a C+ school would be 2 grades higher than every other school in the cluster. And I would hate to see us conclude as a result that that is a significant negative. Keep in mind, this is in the overall context, but do you have some thinking on that?
Absolutely. I appreciate you bringing that up. This is something that we continually come back to and have conversations around is comparative performance. And I think one of the things when we were developing the framework in 22, we really toyed with the idea of allowing nearest neighbor comparisons or cluster comparisons. When we think about the framework and the policy and its use across all schools in our portfolio, we know that being a state agency, we have schools across the entirety, or can have schools across the entirety of Tennessee. And so we were trying to develop criteria that is applicable in all situations. I think when we think about unique situations like you're speaking about with Shelby County, those contextual pieces of information weigh in heavily when we talk about high stakes decisions, particularly at interim and renewal. That is data that we look very closely at in decisions like that in terms of performance that lives somewhat outside of the framework itself. Another component that I think is, and where we really landed when we developed this, was looking at subgroup performance. And so that's a really contextualized indicator for many schools, is how those subgroups of students are performing in relation to the resident district for that same subgroup, which provides a little more context than just looking at overall proficiency in all of the 4 main subjects in comparison to that district. If this is something that, it is the interest of the commission to build some flexibility into the framework, we can absolutely discuss that in terms of comparative performance. Just providing the context that when we were developing this 3 years ago, that continued to be a conversation that we came back to of how do we make this consistent across our portfolio of schools, being that we're going to potentially be in multiple districts, that the comparative performance may be to 2 schools, right? Or it could be a situation where we're in large metropolis areas where it's hundreds of schools. So that's why behind where we landed, but knowing that we do take into account comparative performance in a much more narrow lens when we're looking at high stakes decisions, and even in situations of intervention as well.
Well, I think what I'm looking for is some flexibility by way of a footnote that says that as we look at the comparative, that we should consider the overall context of the district that we're evaluating the schools in. Because it really is. I mean, Shelby County has over 120 schools. And it varies widely. And what I don't want, because I know there's a lot of scrutiny on, are we holding people accountable, which we are fully committed to doing. I want to be sure we have something in here that allows us the flexibility. Because like I said, it's not a surprise. We might have somebody who's a C+ and technically doesn't meet standards and is 2 letter grades higher than everybody in their cluster. And I would not want to be in a situation where we evaluate them more harshly when for those children in those schools, this is obviously a good alternative.
Sure,
So
absolutely.
if we could do that,
I can work on developing something, yeah.
if that's okay with the.
No, I actually really agree. Thank you.
Great. All right,
Moving on, I'm sorry, I
No,
interrupted
that's
you.
helpful, thank you. Operational section adjustments. So the operations section of the school performance framework is largely compliance-driven. We have some adjustments that we're making to a few indicators within the framework. First is 1C, which is enrollment in alignment with the charter agreement. We're adjusting this indicator to look at the school's enrollment over time instead of in alignment with the agreement. It's a truer indicator of success or distress to look at enrollment variance within 10% of each year against the original, then just looking at against the original agreement. The idea here is that we are looking to see if the enrollment is drastically fluctuating year over year, because as we know, if a school is losing students at a large rate, that would be considered an indicator of distress. So that's the tweaks that we've made to 1C. 1E is student retention rates by subgroup. This indicator was included within the framework to capture counseling out or abnormalities in student retention by subgroup of students. So we're just proposing to put a threshold there that subgroup retention rates need to be within 5% of the overall student retention rate. And then 4B is suspension rate goals. We've adjusted this indicator to now measure if a school is accurately reporting suspensions. This is a tricky indicator. There's a lot of variance in terms of how this is reported. And so the way that we're approaching this is ensuring from a compliance standpoint that schools are appropriately recording suspensions, not necessarily like measuring the suspensions against something else. And then the last one here, attendance. We've adjusted the attendance goals to align with state and federal accountability measures. Similar to suspension rate goals that I mentioned, we're really looking at this. It used to be aligned to the school or LEA plan, which is just not necessarily a clean measure as it can vary a lot between schools. And so we're looking to really, from the lens of attendance, just align directly to what the state or federal accountability measures are. I'll pause quickly. Any questions on those indicators before we jump into discussion on our next two that I'm very excited about?
I do have one quick question, Maggie, and it's related to 1C.
Sure.
So if we look
Sorry,
at
which page you on?
page 26, So if we look at the previous year's enrollment and not against the maximum allotted, could we run into a situation where a school is significantly under its maximum allotment, but they do have variance over where they are today, and we're not necessarily accurately capturing? I wonder how, I see some smiles, so I wonder how you guys are thinking about reconciling that.
Yes, that's a great question. So we have other indicators in our framework that are looking at the material terms of the charter agreement itself. And so we can capture, if a school is drastically different from the charter agreement itself, like we have an indicator 1A that can capture that. I think in terms of enrollment variance, we have schools update their budgeted enrollment annually, and so we're holding them to that versus like the charter agreement itself. I think oftentimes with timing, when a charter agreement is developed to, year 5 or 7, when they've maybe moved facilities or whatever else, like things can change. And oftentimes it's hard as authorizers to have, to go back to that charter agreement and amend it and go through a formal process to just update an enrollment number when we're really looking at, based on where you were and where you are you maintaining your enrollment over time? So that's really the intent behind the change to 1C. But just so you know, we do have in the framework in 1A the opportunity to capture significant variances from the charter agreement, which is that material terms line item.
Okay, great,
And-
thanks.
Commissioner Patterson, if I can just add, the term of the charter agreement around enrollment does include language similar to what Maggie was just discussing, wherein if there's a significant variance, the commission has the right to determine that's a material term that needs to come for an amendment. And we also include language to say we will look at that year over year to determine if there's a material variance.
Great, thank you, I appreciate that. Go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Can I ask you about 4D, credentialing?
Sure.
I'm reading it. I've been living it, and not trying to dive into a potential issue, but do you all feel it's real clear here about what the options are, and how you can comply? I mean, we've had schools in front of us, as we know, where we had issues and had to work with them. And I said, just having seen this real time, I just looked at that and say, do you think this is pretty clear about what's expected, how it all comes about? That's the only reason, I'm just asking for clarity.
So I think the way it's worded is that they materially comply with law and rules and regulation. And so, I mean, we hold our schools to that. I'll say that we have performance reviews that Rebecca leads and can speak in much more detail about, where we look very specifically at this indicator with schools quarterly, where we will provide to them whether or not they are in compliance with this indicator, on or off track. And so the schools are very aware, in alignment with this indicator on the framework, as to where they are trending. I don't know if there's anything you'd want to add to that.
Okay, thanks, Maggie. You can go to the next section.
Great. Okay, so we're going to have a discussion. I think that we have some indicators that we would really like to open up for discussion here. Indicators 1D and 4G. These are found on page 26 and 38 of the framework. The discussion that I hope to have today, and just really get your weigh in on, we as staff have gone back and forth on this quite a bit, is looking to see for these two indicators, which are student retention and teacher and leader retention, as to if we are looking to set a bar, or if we are looking at percent variance over time, and just discussing the pros and cons of both. So starting here with these two indicators, we've proposed two options for you. Basically, what these two options are doing is, one is setting a bar or a standard, and one is considered a more contextualized approach. And so I'll give you some more details here as I walk through this. The first option is to set a threshold for performance that we would measure the school against. So in this instance, for both indicators, we're proposing 70%. The second option, which is option B, is looking at percent variance, which compares the school to itself over time within a 5% variance of previous years. So these are two kind of separate schools of thought here for these two indicators. When looking at the two options, as you can probably imagine, option B offers a more contextualized approach. It offers the ability to account for a school that may have different staffing models or serves different communities, some of which may be more transient than others when we're looking at student retention rates. However, it doesn't set a standard. For instance, a school could meet standard with a 30% teacher or leader retention rate year over year. Adversely, option A offers a standard. The question becomes, do you all as commission, do you believe that there should be a standard set for teacher and leader and student retention? Or what and how much context should be weighed in these two indicators as well? So before we jump into the discussion, I have a couple pieces of information to provide for you to help kind of think about this. We pressure tested. As I said, commission staff have had this conversation round and round, and we have done all sorts of pressure tests. Huge shout out to Rebecca and all of the work she's done with this. You also have a pressure test document within your notes that also provides more details if you would like to look at that as well. But on the screen, some information provided as to how we came to these metrics. The slide here looks at student retention. So when we're talking about the definition of student retention, we're looking at students who are in the building on October 1 of the school year, and who of them are still enrolled on the next school year's October 1. So it's an October 1 to October 1 indicator, and that just accounts for some natural attrition that happens in the beginning of the school year, but we're looking by unique student. The slide here compares all of our schools. The overall median is 75.7, and the proposed threshold here is 70%. This threshold, as you can see in the box up above, 85% of our schools would meet standard. When looking at the percent variance, the median was 4.7 for our schools. We proposed 5%. This is also consistent with other measures that we have in our school performance framework, where we look at about 5% variance year over year. And so from a consistency standpoint, that's one of the reasons we chose that, but 89% of our schools would meet standard on that proposed indicator. So that's for student retention.
Just a clarifying question, is the word variance, should I think of that as the same as shortfall? Or can variance be up or down? I'm just trying to.
Great clarifying question.
Okay.
So for a school to not meet, if it was at a 6% reduction, right? So we're not going to penalize schools for having greater than student retention variance. That's a good question.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I'd like to talk about student retention before we go into
Absolutely.
teachers and leaders. In Memphis, a third of our students leave their school and relocate into another school every school year. Families move, families have changes in circumstances, and children end up with grandparents or parents separate. So a full third of our kids, we know on day one, are very likely not to be in the school by the end of the school year. So I'm very much committed, we need to keep the percent variance, in part because one of the things that happens, which is a great thing, is that parents attain a better economic situation and are able to move into a better neighborhood. And I don't want to do anything that penalizes the schools that choose to work in challenging communities, because we have a fair amount of that. The other thing is, this was such a serious problem. A superintendent about 20 years ago insisted that all of the schools teach their lessons on the same schedule, so that when kids changed schools and they landed in a new school, they would continue their work in that grade at the point in time where they left from their old school. It is that serious of a problem. So I feel strongly we need to keep a percent variance, and it should be either or. For the schools that don't have this problem, the absolute threshold won't be a problem, but we need to do it this way, in my opinion.
I'm sure any other questions or comments?
I'd like to ask one question.
Sure, go ahead.
As I think about this question, I think a little bit about what you were mentioning with the clusters. It does feel, oh, sorry. Can you hear me? It does feel like, at least in Nashville, certain parts of the city have more transient communities. So I'm curious, like, of the, 15% who didn't meet the threshold, were those in communities where there's more movement? Just kind of curious if you looked at that. Because I feel like some of our schools, you certainly want to think about, you don't want a mass exodus of families just leaving the school. So how do you account for that? But also accounting for families who are moving for other reasons. You don't want to penalize the school, so.
Sure. In the pressure test document that we provided, we have these rates pressure tested and broken down by Middle and West Grand divisions so that you can kind of see how that falls. In terms of exact cluster, we don't necessarily have that, but we have pressure tested this with schools and know, to Commissioner Richards' point, that there are schools that would definitely benefit from a percent variance versus a threshold. I also want to name that we've offered option A and B. There's an option C where we could do both and in some form of fashion where, if there is a situation where a school will be held to percent variance unless they're over a specific amount, that is an option as well that we could incorporate if that is, something that interests the commission.
Yeah, I guess you took the words out of my mouth. I was hopeful to see maybe some combination that didn't knock out a particular neighborhood or community where 75% may be unreasonable. So I don't know where we are on this particular part of the proposal, if this is something on first read. So this is also first read. Okay. So then if you could give us maybe an alternative version. But I also do agree with Chair Richards that depending on what the pressure test data looks like, if most of the schools that don't meet it are all in our Grand Division in Memphis, then maybe it isn't a fair measure to just do the threshold. So I guess maybe two requests. One, looking at an alternative C, but then also maybe allowing us a little more detail on the data so that we could take a deeper look. I see a question from Chair Griscom. Were you going to respond first?
She has some data that she could
go ahead.
provide. I think that
Okay.
might be helpful.
Okay, and then Chair Griscom.
So if we're looking at a 70% threshold for teacher retention, school year 23-20, student retention, 23-24, we would have had two schools that did not meet that 70%. One was in Memphis, one was in Nashville.
I still know, I'm Chris where you are. I mean, I always believe you need a number that you're working from. And I don't disagree, Terrence, what you said. I think if there's some variation here, but your point about if somebody's at 30%, that to me is not, what we're looking for in terms of retention. And that, I just think you need some number in there that you work from. But I also agree with Terrence that there are reasons to make this not so stringent that it doesn't recognize certain issues that may be going on that are, related to a particular location or a particular, school or whatever. But I mean, I'd worry if somebody came back every year and said, well, I'm hitting it because I've got a 30% student retention. And we'd say, no, you're not. I mean, there's really something fundamentally wrong at that school if 30% is what it is. So, thank you.
So what I'm hearing, is we'll draft some language around 1D student retention where we can have a combination of option A and B where a school can meet standard at a 70% student retention rate. And if not, we will look at percent variance within 5% of the previous year's enrollment.
Can I?
Yes, go
I
ahead.
do wonder, is there a floor that the commission says, if you are below X percentage? Because again, I think to Chair Griscom's point, I agree with you. My biggest push to the staff is if we do this variance, we need to be comfortable with saying 30% is acceptable. And I don't think any of us around this table would say 30% is acceptable. And so I'm just wondering is if we're giving this either or, but we say this is the floor. And if you're below this, you could still, I think also remember, there is a world where you could still meet overall operationally and meet that this is the one you don't. But is there a stake in the ground that the commission may want to consider in this option C? I just throw it out there.
If I may, Commissioner, and this is where I wonder if like the comparative data with the cluster could be helpful. It's like, could the floor be?
I don't have access.
Oh, you can't see that? Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, never mind.
Do you mean you don't have access to see whether the retention rate of that school for students is significantly lower than nearby schools? Okay.
Yeah, we do not have access to other schools' student retention rates in that same way. It can be calculated. It can vary.
Yeah, I think what we need is a threshold on the bottom as well as a threshold that, if you make 70%, I'm just going to use 70%. If you make 70%, you're great. If you are below 30%, even if you're within 5%, you're not great. And then figure it out as to what is the percentage and we'll live with it. I mean, I think y'all need to noodle this around, given that we've got realities.
Yeah, I think we can definitely pressure test some numbers to figure out kind of what our high threshold and low threshold can and should be. And we can offer that before final reading at our next commission meeting,
That'd be
if
good.
that's helpful.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds great. Thank you. Really appreciate it. And also, just as we're thinking about these questions, I mean, this is a very difficult and sensitive topic, and so really appreciate the thoughtfulness that the staff is giving, and obviously to my fellow commissioners as well. I think we want to make sure we set a high standard, but we also are sympathetic to some realities. So, and I think you guys have taken a good first cut at this, and I'm looking forward to the next iteration.
Great.
So thank you.
In the same vein, I'd like to pivot to 4G, which is teacher and leader retention. So here on the screen, you are seeing the pressure test that we ran for teacher and leader retention. Couple things that I kind of want to start with. The way we measure teacher and leader retention, or the proposed way, is looking at teachers of record and principal. We measure this by looking at who is in the building on October 1 of the school year and comparing to those who were asked back for the following October 1. So that doesn't account, I mean, the ones that are not in the calculation are teachers that were intentionally dismissed or were promoted within the network. So we're not penalizing schools for those sorts of decisions. We're just looking solely at, the teachers who stayed in the position in which they were in without those two factors. So when looking at teacher retention, as you can see through the data, this is a bit more nuanced. I want to name the struggles that schools are facing both statewide and nationally when it comes to teacher turnover. When reviewing this data, particularly in the last couple years, teacher retention numbers are not as stable. And so when we're looking at this data, you can see that it's different than the previous slide. So wanted to just name that before we kind of jump in. So what you'll see here is we have the overall median for teacher retention at 66.6%. The proposed threshold that we have is 70%. I want to note that the previous threshold that we had was 75, so this is a reduction. Percent variance, we also have this here. The overall median for percent variance is 16.7%. In consistency's sake, the proposed target is 5%. It's what most of our percent variances are within our framework. So that box at the top outlines kind of where the schools fell. So by threshold, 40.9% would meet, and by percent variance, 33.3% would meet. So one more thing to say here, and Tess mentioned this in what she was saying, is, this is one indicator of many on our school performance framework. A school not meeting this indicator would not necessarily mean that they would not meet overall. But I think this is a similar conversation to, and why we're bringing it to you all today is, this is is a threshold appropriate, or is percent variance more appropriate? Do we want to set a high and low? Option C, those all exist. But wanted you all to consider this with your discussion.
You mentioned
Go ahead, Commissioner.
it tries to, it tries to exclude those who've been promoted within the charter school or within the charter. What about those teachers that have been, and this is not uncommon, those teachers that have been recruited by another charter school network? Sometimes high-performing teachers are very attractive to other networks, both in-state and out-of-state.
We don't factor that in. So if a teacher leaves on their own accord, that would factor into their attrition.
Any other comments or?
Yeah, this one's really tough, especially since I sat through yesterday a whole analysis that was done on the departure of teachers from the profession in the state of Tennessee across the board. And the numbers for teachers, they were broken out by teachers who had followed a traditional pathway through a four-year college with an education major and had had the benefits of practice teaching and probably a better understanding of what they were getting into. And then also comparing what they called non-traditional, and these are people who may be professionals who decide to come in for teaching. It includes Teach for America. It's people with bachelors that don't have an education background. And the numbers were pretty shocking. Teacher retention is a huge problem, and it has, very little to do with the school environment per se. It has a lot to do, just looking at those numbers, with the difficulties of being a teacher anywhere in this day and age. I'm real concerned about setting these standards where we know that less than 50% of our schools are going to meet them. I'm not comfortable with that. I don't have a magic number, but I'm really troubled by this. And yet I know from our experience in the renewal space and the keeping and retaining excellent teachers is probably the single biggest factor towards adequate academic performance. So I'm not really sure what to do with this one is kind of where I end up, because I'm not comfortable. All I can say is I'm not comfortable with these numbers.
Yeah, so I think, Chair, I'm in a similar place, though. I would love to I would love for us to make the threshold the standard in this particular instance. And even though we know today 40% of schools aren't going to meet, again, the threshold, which I see in this case as a standard, does it somehow set a high expectation for our schools that this is our standard just because we're not meeting it today? But I know that it's probably unfair to the school because they're going to say, well, heck, 60, yeah, right, 60%.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if
can't
you
meet it.
set it at 66%, half of them are going to make it, half of them aren't, just based right now.
And so that's sort of the first half of my thought. I think the second half of my thought would require a bit of a fiscal note, and that would say, could we somehow provide an incentive to encourage schools to meet the particular standard in this case? But again, that's sort of a more idealistic thought. So but I ultimately end where you end, Chair, which is,
Well,
I don't know
noodling
what
this
to do
around
here.
a little, let me try it this way and see if this gets us closer to the end game. If their school performance is A and B and they have a TVAS 5 and they're only keeping 70% of their teachers, I think we'd be giving them a medal. So I think we need to maybe tie somehow school performance into, poor Rebecca, you're going to just hate me for this. But maybe there's some way to look at it. If your school performance is a certain, your teacher retention can be above 50%. If your performance is below, you need to get it. I don't know. I I mean, that's just another way to think about it.
Executive Director Stovall, you want to weigh in here for us?
Yeah, she's going to throw something at me, too.
I am going to throw something at. So the origin story behind this indicator, way back when, was that when it was with the state board, because the state board was responsible for a lot around teacher performance, felt that including a teacher retention rate was an important indicator. We, as a commission, can decide this is not an indicator you want in your performance framework. I more just want to get a sense of, from the commission, yes, this is something we believe we need to be tracking and measuring and reporting out on. So I think there are a couple of options. We could report out on it and grade it, which is what we currently do, okay? And figure out some measure, and also be comfortable with this is the bar, and maybe the bar is 60%, and if you don't meet it 1 year, you don't meet it 1 year. Because I do think when I dug into the data, last year's data was a down year for us. And if you look at 22, 23, it's a much higher percentage of schools that are meeting. So something was in the water in 23, 24. I also think there could be a route where we go and say, we're going to report out on teacher retention rates as a part of your annual report, like we do school demographic data in comparison to your geographic district. We're not grading you on it, but it's a point of conversation. So I kind of want a gut check to make sure, how strongly do you all feel that we need this indicator as in a grade or not?
I think you laid it out really well. I think the example, which I think we maybe discussed in a previous conversation, is a situation where you have a school turnaround, right? And you have a new head of school that's come in, and so the retention of teachers looks really low, but actually the school leader is seeking to make a turnaround in the performance of the school. So I like the way you framed it, which is it should be an indicator that we're tracking, but it's more context for a conversation about, well, what's going on here and why? Is there a larger problem, or is there a solution that's in the works to some other performance issue that might be, might have plagued the school in the past?
I hate to keep going back to, but I'm going one more time, because the issue that I have seen publicly was not about retention of teachers, it was the type of teacher. And I don't know how you capture that, but what really has played out, and because the conversation unfortunately has been without context, and that's what makes it really been difficult to watch this, but I have. And partly because you all have educated me enough to understand what's going on here. But the one thing people gravitated to was the issue that popped up, was the type of teacher. Nobody has really talked about whether these teachers have been there for 8 years or 4 years or 5 years. So in my mind, there's something here about the type of teacher with all the different ways, and Chris touched on it, that you can now get into this profession. Do we have in the classroom the type of teachers that everybody ought to feel good about that are there? And I think it probably then will somehow tie back to retention. So I've just made it even worse for you. But that's what concerns me, because I have been reading this for 3 weeks now. And that's what everybody's gravitated to, because they don't understand some of the other issues like you all do.
And if I could ask one question, I think I know the answer to this question, but I want to get your professional opinions. Can you explain to us what the correlation is to student outcomes when we think about teacher retention? Is there a strong
Commissioner
correlation?
Patterson, that's a very big question that many people are doing much research on. I would say that it honestly, just anecdotally, it varies even in our portfolio. We have schools who are very high academically performing that have lower teacher retention rates, and we have schools that have very high teacher retention rates that are high performing as well. So I think it just, the answer that you don't want to hear is it just depends. I think that, this is really to Tessa's point, I think it's really your call as to if this is a measure that we, as the commission, believe that we should hold our schools accountable to, versus it being a point of conversation that we can have at a site visit when we are already talking to teachers and stakeholders about their satisfaction, right? That absolutely exists. But really, what we're bringing here, and also just to name, we're in a bit of uncharted territory. I think similar to the conversations we have around chronic absenteeism, where we're like, what is going on? This is a similar situation where we're seeing numbers in recent years that we haven't seen before. This is new. And, we're, in a lot of ways, it's up to the commission as to whether a standard should be set, whether or not schools are necessarily meeting it, right? Like our framework is set as a standard. It doesn't mean that everybody meets it, right? But at the same time, I know this is nuanced. And I think that this is why we're bringing it in front of you today for a very fruitful and difficult discussion.
Go ahead.
ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
This may not be a great question, but in previous life, I used to track this data within a charter network, and it was actually a little bit complicated to track, and every network tracked it differently. And you mentioned that you're disregarding teachers that opted out, who were dismissed. I'm just curious, do you feel like this is super valid data? Is it self-reported? I also wouldn't want to say you need to hit 70% and then folks start kind of doing the numbers a little bit differently of we actually dismissed that teacher. I've seen it look a little bit different from different networks, so just curious your perspective there.
I'm going to kick this to Rebecca, who crunches these numbers and can talk about validity.
Would I stake my life on the numbers? No, it's not like TCAP where everything's run super tightly, but I will say that our source of data is the personnel tracker that Pam does a fantastic job monitoring. This is where we make sure all of our teachers are properly licensed and have the proper background checks. So I know that that source is valid. And then our operators will report back and they let us know if there is any change in status. We've had, unfortunately, individuals where staff members have passed away, and so we use professional discretion to make sure that that is accurately reported in the numbers. So it's a little more squishy than I would prefer, but I think of the ways that it can be measured, I think that this is a really tight system.
This is super helpful discourse. I think, given this will be on first read, given we've had this robust conversation, I think and also given there are other factors that weigh more heavily toward impacting student performance and outcomes. This may be something that we, at present, look at as, I can't remember how you framed it, Executive Director.
Reporting, but not grading.
Thank you. I think we'll
Okay,
put this in the reported but not graded category on first read.
So
Maybe just one thing to add, and I think maybe Commissioner Smith was getting at this, is, what are the risks of unintended consequences? And what might those unintended consequences be that we're not imagining today, were we to make this a graded score?
Well, one of the things that worries me is teachers are evaluated 1 through 5, with 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. A 3 gives a year of growth for having the student for a year. A 5 gives 2 years of growth. A 1 gives less than 6 months. You do not want teachers who are 1s and 2s, and I would hate to see somebody keeping 1s and 2s and not counseling them out. First of all, if you're a teacher and you're not providing a year of growth for a year of having your students, I would think you'd get very frustrated and find it difficult to be a teacher. So to me, it is, setting a standard, you might get an unintended consequence that way. And I'm really sensitive on this licensing issue because so many of the teachers who were leaving in the reporting that was done just across the state yesterday were leaving because they couldn't get permanently licensed. Not for things they couldn't do, but because the licensing process had a number of challenges. I'll just put it that way.
absolutely. So what I'm hearing, just to make sure,
Yeah.
we're going to remove teacher and leader retention as an indicator that schools are held to on the framework. And instead, we are going to report that in annual report and have discussions around this in our monitoring that we do with schools. But schools are no longer held to this as an indicator.
That's correct.
Thank you. I appreciate the discussion. As next steps, I will take your feedback from this discussion and I will implement it into the document. And so I'll make the changes that we've discussed on student retention and we'll remove teacher and leader retention from the framework. School operators will receive a copy of the updated version as a result of this discussion for review. And then for final read in July, we will bring the document with the changes, and then that will be reflected in the new school year's charter agreements.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I think since this is a policy that the Rules, Policy, and Governance Committee will vote on in their committee meeting later today, we won't need to do anything for our particular committee, but this will be one that you guys will see shortly. Okay. All right. The final agenda item is an update on the 24-25 school year from Beth Figueroa. Beth, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chair Patterson. I'm happy to say that after that last discussion, this will be a very light and breezy presentation and maybe very little discussion. So as you know, at each commission meeting, we always report out just how our schools are doing, the various kind of work streams that we're working through. And so we're going to cover everything from site visits, pre-opening, our ongoing oversight and activities with our schools, and then I'll just close with some updates with our TCAP assessment. And so first, just touch on our site visits and updates. At this point, we have completed all site visits for our 17 schools. And as a reminder, these site visits are conducted throughout the school year, and it's an opportunity for us to get into our school buildings to see firsthand the instruction that's taking place. We're able to talk with various stakeholders. So we talk with parents, we talk with teachers about their satisfaction with their school sites. We talk with students, all of those various stakeholders, board members, because it gives us a good check on how things are going within the school building. Site visits are half day or full day based on a preset criteria. And at the conclusion of each site visit, we provide each school with a report that summarizes these are areas that we noticed strengths, and then these are some areas where we see that you could improve upon. And so overall, now that we've kind of wrapped up all of those site visits, I'm happy to report that they confirmed strong performance at all of our school sites across areas that we were specifically looking for. So school culture, family engagement, delivery of program, and school safety, all of those items were positive. And then next, I'm going to transition to pre-opening. As you know, we are in the process of working with 7 schools through the pre-opening process. This is the most schools we've worked through this process with at a single time. But this table here just provides a list of those schools that we are working with. And so next slide, we have just some general updates. And so this year we adopted a ready-to-open criteria, which outlines the areas that we firmly believe that a school should be meeting these specific indicators in order to demonstrate that they are ready to open. And so spring milestones that our schools are working towards at this time include facility readiness. We look at staffing, enrollment, as well as budget preparation, because we know that these milestones are really the foundation for a school opening strong. And schools that struggle in these specific areas, we know that they either will need to delay or they may open and have some struggles. And we want to make sure that those schools are really supported and set up for success. And so the update for this presentation is that all 7 schools are on track to open in fall of 2025. We have facilities. They're working at this point on staffing and recruiting students. And so really positive update for pre-opening. And then next, we'll transition to our ongoing charter school performance update and review. And so a cornerstone of our monitoring of schools is our quarterly monitoring process. And that's really when we have the opportunity to lean into our school's operational performance. So for example, that's when we are looking at credentialing, background checks, how they're doing with special populations. And so from an operational standpoint, our portfolio of schools continues to be strong. We see schools coming into compliance. So for example, credentialing, when we find that a school is lacking credentials, we flag that as a part of our quarterly monitoring, and happy to say that our schools are quickly coming into compliance. Another piece of this process is monitoring our financial performance of our schools. So in the spring, we received their semi-annual financial statements. And so we put all of those financial statements into our framework and look at the various indicators and determine whether or not our schools are on track or maybe off track in certain indicators. And so we have had a few schools that had a few areas where they look like they might not be meeting indicators or where they're off track. And so we've been having conversations with those schools and getting just more information so that way we can ensure that we are doing our due diligence as staff, as well as that the school has a plan for long-term sustainability, even if they are maybe off track in certain financial indicators. And then next slide. Thank you. Just transitioning now to the TCAP assessment timeline. So at this point, we have a timeline here outlining the key dates for the TCAP assessment. Schools have been notified and provided with all of these dates. A key date is that the main window is going to open in 2 weeks. And so our team is working very feverishly in the coming weeks on boxes and making sure that all of those are sent out to their schools. However, all of this has been communicated with our schools, and we are working through this timeline.
And
then-
if boxes arrive tomorrow, you may be sorting boxes.
Yes, I was talking to Lawrence. He said, okay, that's what he said. Yeah. Yes, I asked him if he wanted to present his slides, and he said, I might be doing boxes. So I was like, okay. And then just in the spirit of continuous improvement, just highlighting some changes that have taken place this year from prior years. So specifically, we have our Memphis area schools. They're going to have their materials addressed directly to their schools. Another update is that dynamic learning maps was extended to cover the entire year. And so this includes grades 3 through 8 and 11, ELA and math alternative assessments, as well as schools will be required to assess eligible students in the fall and the spring windows. And then the final points here, the grade 3 retake window is May 21st through May 30th. We will know more specific dates as we get closer, but we do know that proficiency and non-proficiency scores will be shared by May 20th at the latest. And those are our updates at this time. I can take any questions.
Thank you, Beth. Anyone have any questions for Beth? Are we sure? Okay. Thank you, Beth. Appreciate that. And thank you all for your attendance. I do want to make one note. I actually thought the interactive section of your presentation, Maggie, was super helpful. So hats off to the staff. I don't know how you coordinated, but I thought it was really helpful to really engage us as commissioners. So it was kind of fun too. So thank you. So I hate Commissioner Smith missed it. He would have enjoyed that.
We do have a Commissioner Smith here.
That's true. You're right. Commissioner Eddie Smith was not here to enjoy that. You're right, Lauren. You're right. Thank you again for the participation at this meeting of the School Performance and Accountability Committee of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. If we don't have any final comments before we adjourn, the next meeting of the School Performance and Accountability Committee is scheduled for July 24th, 2025. Any final comments, or I'll entertain a motion?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. The ayes have it, and we are adjourned. Thank you.
Chair Lauren Smith and I conferred, and we're going to take a brief break before we start rules, policy, and governance. So, Chair Smith, do you want to say 3 o'clock? 10 minutes? 15? 3 o'clock. Let's just say 3 o'clock on the dot.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Lauren Smith. Welcome to the March 27th, 2025 meeting of the Rules, Policy, and Governance Committee of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. Hayden, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Levine? Here. Chair Smith?
Present.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Hayden. On today's agenda, we have several policy changes and one rule, all presented by General Counsel Ashley Thomas. First, we will hear changes to LEA Policy 1801 on first reading. Following that, we have changes to two commission policies, 3.700 on first reading and 3.100 on final reading. And finally, we have Commission Rule 1185-01-01-0.02 on final reading. Do any commissioners have questions or comments before we vote to approve the agenda? Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. I second.
All those in favor say aye. Opposed, say nay. Oh, aye, sorry. The ayes have it. The agenda is approved. The minutes of the, sorry. Oh, great.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The minutes are approved. Great. The first item on our agenda today will be discussion and vote on changes to LEA Policy 1801 on first reading. Ashley, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chair Smith. So this policy is up on first reading. It reflects changes that were requested by some of our operators that we look at our SPED policy. And what this does is really clarify the roles and responsibilities for our charter schools as well as the commission in providing those services to our special populations. Just to briefly go over it, it clarifies the appropriate provision of services and that each school is responsible for providing that continuum of services. It lays out that the commission staff may serve as a member of an IEP team for placement decisions, including and up to external placement. And then it includes a definition of external placement, which is anywhere outside of the main campus of that school. Again, this is up for first reading, but if there are updates or changes suggested by the commission, we can discuss those now.
Thank you, Ashley.
Behind tab 3 of your binder.
Commissioners, do we have any questions or comments?
I move approval of the policy as recommended. I move approval of the policy as recommended.
Thank you.
I second, and I think this is a good practical work format for addressing these more complex problems, and I appreciate the work that the staff did to come to this accommodation.
Great. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say no. The ayes have it. The motion is approved. The next item on our agenda will be a discussion and vote on changes to Commission Policy 3.700 on first reading. Ashley, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Smith. Again, as stated by Chair Patterson in the SPA committee, this is the school performance framework. There was a robust discussion at the previous committee meeting. So at this point, because the Rules, Policy, and Governance has to review all policies for legality, it is up now for first reading vote with the changes that were discussed in the previous committee.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. Any further questions or comments?
I'll move it.
Great.
Second.
Great. All those opposed, say aye. Or sorry, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Getting ahead of myself. Opposed, say no. The ayes have it. The motion's approved. The next item on our agenda will be a discussion and vote on changes to Commission Policy 3.100 on final reading. Ashley, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Smith. So on final reading, these changes reflect the discussion that took place at our January meeting up to today. To briefly go over those updates, this includes changes that the executive director would make a recommendation for any request to delay beyond the 1-year statutory right to delay. This includes the commission reserving the right to require an in-person appearance for questioning by the charter operators. And it also prohibits a delay beyond that 1 year, barring any exigent circumstances or act of God, as Commissioner Eddie Smith would say.
Thank you, Ashley. Any questions or comments?
I'll move the policy.
Second.
Great. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. All right, the ayes have it. The motion's approved. And the final item on our agenda will be discussion and vote on Commission Rule 1185-01-01-.02 and on final reading. Ashley, you're recognized.
Thank you. Just to refresh your memories, this particular change is to comply with statute. There was an inadvertent inclusion of a reconciliation period in a renewal appeal, and that is not in statute, and so this rule just cleans that up and removes that language. It's ready for a roll call final vote.
Great. Any questions before we move it?
I move approval of the regulation on final reading.
Second.
Great. And this vote requires a roll call, so Hayden, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Levine,
Aye.
Chair Lauren Smith.
Aye.
Madam Chair, you have 2 ayes.
Great. Thank you so much. The motion is approved. Thank you all for your attendance and participation in this meeting of the Rules, Policy, and Governance Committee of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. Are there any final comments before I entertain a motion to adjourn?
Madam Chair, I just want to commend the chair. It's quite an improvement and an upgrade.
Oh, thank you.
Although the previous
Commissioner.
chair is sorely missed.
Chair Smith, do you mind if I take 1 second just to preview July's
Please,
meeting? So Chair Smith and Ashley and I talked that the committee should anticipate a pretty robust July agenda that would include our normal LEA policies that we review annually based on what any changes from the General Assembly. And depending on legislation, the potential for some additional rules and policies that we need to consider. So I wanted to put that on everyone's radar. Once the General Assembly adjourns, Ashley and I and Hayden and Chair Smith will work together to bring anything that we need to establish any new processes or procedures to our meeting in July.
Thank you, Tess. Any further comments? Great. If there's nothing further, do we have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. The ayes have it, and we are adjourned. Thank you.
Get off so easy in July.
I know, right? Good warm up.
The audacity of Ms. Allen